All right, hey people. Today is August 19th, 2023. It's about 4 p.m. here in Indiana. My name is Chris Lucas. This is my show, The Protestant View. At least it is on most places I'm broadcasting to. By the way, if anyone ever wants to download my show, share them, if they do find it beneficial, you're more than welcome to. You're more than welcome to even monetize it if you want. I mean, until future notice, at least if there's something that you find of value that you want to throw on your channel, that's fine. I mean, as far as like all my material here. Now, every once in a while, I will upload someone else's video, so I wouldn't go monetize that stuff. But when it's something like this, you're more than free to go and upload it to your own channel, upload it anywhere. Anyway, so I'm gonna get a couple of things out of the way while I'm waiting for people to show up. I did invite some guests, but I'm not sure if they're going to show up because it's very short notice. I only talked to these people about maybe about 15 minutes ago. But if some of the special people, special guests, if they wind up showing up, I'll give them some priority. Okay, finally my screen pops up. I don't know why it was slow to share. But just in case I don't cover all my points today, I want to give a shout out to two channels that I find and that I think are going to be beneficial for people. And that's this one channel called Preaching in Politics by Scott Clem. If you really want to understand Daniel, because I'm not going to be able to go over it in as much detail as I want to go over it. I'm someone who works about 70 hours a week. I am very busy, and I got children and everything like that also. So it's real hard for me to do videos, and my schedule's a little erratic as far as how many hours I'm going to work per week. So, but anyway, there's this channel called Preaching in Politics, ran by Scott Clem, who's also a U.S. Representative in Wyoming. I think it's kind of interesting because you don't have very many people that are decent people in politics, let alone hold a historicist view. I find that very extremely rare. And I know some people who watch my show, they're Sabbatarians like me. A lot of times you don't want it. I know some people have like this particular thing about I don't want to hear someone that preaches from a Sunday church, but I think he's really, really, really sound. And I will recommend if you're going to watch any of these. Oh yeah, down here, if you go to playlist on his channel, Preaching in Politics, which I do have in the description, I have this particular playlist in the description. He's got a series on the book of Daniel, and he's also got 70 weeks of prophecy in the Olivet Discourse. I'd recommend both of these, and the things he says and about how he interprets Daniel 11:36 on all the way through the Daniel 12. I think it's really good. Okay, so I'm not sure what you mean by bamboo, Curtis. What you mean by perhaps I could be more explicit. I don't know exactly what you're meaning there, but also, he did do a debate against a futurist recently on this other channel, which I recommend, called Standing for Truth Ministries. Try to blow it up a little bit so people can see it. Standing for Truth Ministries. He did a debate versus this guy named Merritt, or he goes by Crimson Air. So you can see Scott Clem over here. And it's called Daniel 9 Debate. Has the 70-week been fulfilled? And he's also done a debate on there about is dispensationalism biblical, where he's debating Pastor Daniel Aldridge. So I think he does really good on these debates. Oh my gosh, I got the man himself. Scott Clem, I was just talking about you, man. I did not think you would show up because I gave you such short notice. How are you doing? Scott, can you hear me? Well, Scott, whenever you can hear me, feel free to start speaking up. I don't know why you can't hear me. Everyone else can hear me, right? Maybe Scott's got a bad connection. Here, hold on. Let me post a comment. Because maybe he's looking on the YouTube screen. Scott, can you hear me? Oops.
Chris, I can't hear you, buddy. Hold on here. I'm not hearing nothing. I don't know if you can hear me. Let me exit here and try to get back in.
Yeah, I want to let him know I can hear him, but we can't hear. We can't. Obviously, he can't hear us. But so this is awesome. I did not think I could get him on such short notice. So I'm pretty excited about that. Give me a chance to kind of interview him and get his thoughts on things. Because yeah, I just sent him a message maybe 10 minutes before I did my show. And like I said, he's one of the guys I'm very excited to have found recently. Aha, here we go. We might have him now.
Hey.
Now can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now. All right, cool.
Wow, Scott, I cannot believe you got on my show. I know I gave you extremely short notice.
Oh yeah, no, I was my son, my youngest son has a football game here in about, I don't know, 50 minutes or so. And so I've got some time to kill because he needed to show up an hour early. And so I'm just sitting in my car in the parking lot here at the fields, and then I checked my phone, and yeah, I saw that you sent me a message and checked it out, and lo and behold, here we are. So
oh wow, man, good man. Wow, this is exciting for me.
yeah.
Because I was just telling everybody right before I did started up my show, one of the first things I said was it's very rare we find someone who holds office, who also holds a historicist perspective. Because you're a representative in Wyoming, aren't you?
Well, former. So yeah, so I'm not in office any longer at this point. So I actually I was in for 3 terms, and then it was while I was still serving in the legislature that I started pastoring a church, and so something kind of had to give, and so I finished out my term. Through 2020, that's when all the COVID nonsense and everything, was rearing up. And so anyway, I chose not to run at that point. But I'm still involved in politics. I currently serve as the chairman of our county GOP here in my county, in my state. And so I still have my thumb on the pulse of things. I'm just not as involved as I once was.
No, I think that's awesome because I keep telling people, because a lot of people get discouraged about even trying to do anything. And I think it's more or less that the problem is not enough good people are getting involved. It's not that you can't make a difference. It's just not enough people are even attempting to make a difference. And I try to encourage people, try to just even go to one meeting, and with an open attitude, and try to like, and you your own self get make sure you're fully informed when you go there, and then you can at least help inform others. Even if you cannot get someone good in office, at least you're informing others while you're there, and it might be a slow change. You might not have the instant change you're looking for, which I think that's what a lot of people's problem is. They want one instant change, you want it real fast, and you just got to start tiny with the city councils and get those changed, and then go on from there. I mean, You got a lot of neglect for a while, so it's going to take a little. It's not going to be a quick process. Everyone's been neglecting it for a long time. It's just like you can't clean your house in an instant if you've been neglecting cleaning it for a year.
Yeah, exactly. And in that time that believers have been dormant, let's say, you've had a lot of other characters who don't share the values of Christians, and they've really entrenched themselves in the system. And so, yeah, we're a government of, by, and for the people. In America, it's different, and it may not feel like that, especially if people are focused in on like the federal, politics. But things at your state and your local level it really does matter, and your involvement really does matter. It's interesting. And this kind of goes along a little bit with people's philosophy and view of the scriptures. Um, I come from a background of dispensationalism, so I wasn't always, a historicist by any means. Grew up in pre-trib, strong dispensational circles, and what you'll find, especially in some of maybe those, if I can call it, some of those more hardcore dispensational circles, is it's kind of this Gnostic idea that, well, the world is going to hell in the handbasket, and we're just going to leave this place anyway. And so the really important thing is going out and winning souls to Christ, and everything else can kind of go by the wayside. And by no means am I saying that winning souls to Christ is a small thing or a light thing or a trivial thing. Obviously, it's predominant. But the thing that I think that a lot of people have done is they have left off some of the other things that when it comes to this world and living now. And we've kind of got this dualistic Gnostic idea that, well, the world's going to hell, and so we just have to bide our time and until we can escape this world. And I don't know, that's just my observation, and I've seen a lot of Christians in those types of circles who have not gotten involved. I mean, they have opinions about political things by all means, but then if you ask them to get involved or to pay attention or to put a little bit of groundwork into things, it's like they're absent, and the excuse is, well, let's just win souls. That's the important thing, and we're not going to worry about anything else, but we're going to complain about it, and it's like, that something's got to give there. So that's my observation anyway.
All right, awesome. Okay, my friend Solo Scripture just joined. Solo, this is Pastor Scott Clem. I just found him maybe 2 weeks ago, and I'm so excited to find him because I think he gives one of the best presentations on Daniel, the whole book of Daniel. I love what you say, especially once you got to verses 11:36 on forward. I did not personally, I did not really quite know how to interpret those. I was unsure, and when I listened to what you had to say, that made so much sense to me. And then you said something about like I never heard that interpretation about the where it's like that guy, he's not gonna what is it, not gonna like be like a care about women, or I can't think of how that verse goes.
Yeah, the desire of women is what it is. Yeah,
that, like, I did not know how to interpret that. And then you said that would apply to when those women were in the time of Herod, when they were about ready to give birth, and it's kind of like he didn't care about their desire to give birth to the Messiah, and that's right. What it meant. And right. I really like that interpretation.
Yeah, and that's it's I'm learning just like everybody else, and when I went into that study of the book of Daniel, especially thinking about the later chapters, I didn't go into that study necessarily prepared to come to that interpretation of things. And it was actually, I learned a lot through the study of that book myself. And it's like anything, you study it out for yourself. And of course I was studying to feed other people, and the more I learned and the more I put certain things together, it made sense. And of course, I've had some help from others who've, whether it's resources like Philip Morrow, who I found to be a great help, or even another pastor friend of mine who preached on some similar things. Those things finally started to click and make sense. And that's the trouble with Daniel 11, is a lot of people will agree that the things that are written in Daniel 11 in that last vision are in fact things that have taken place in the past. So they'll concede, to things like the dealings of Antiochus Epiphanes, and some of the conflicts that happen between the kings of the north and the kings of the south. But then when you get to, and I forget what it is, like I think it's like verse 34, 35 onward, there we leapfrog thousands of years into the future. Then people say, well, that's the Antichrist, and it just doesn't make sense, especially from Daniel's perspective. This is a vision. This is a dream that he has at least some sort of cursory understanding on. And yeah, there's no indication that it leapfrogs thousands of years into the future, and now we're talking about a future Antichrist. And so when you look at the history in particular, and that was the thing that was enlightening to me, is really digging into the history of this stuff. And you realize that, from the time of Israel's return from exile, in which they rebuild Jerusalem, they regathered, rebuild the temple, all that kind of stuff. They didn't have a king. But there was one person who was called a king, which was Herod, and he was a king. And that fits with that language of that passage. And so all of those things really match the life and testimony of Herod. And the thing that stuck out to me, so you mentioned the desire of women piece, and that was certainly something that stuck out. But there was another thing that stuck out to me, and that was that had to do with the verses a little bit later on, and I'm not looking right at it, but coincide with what we find in Matthew, in the butchering of children. It says something like, "With fury he will do something," or whatever, and we have similar language then that's found in Matthew. And I thought, wow, that's just how more precise can you get when it comes to some things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I decided to bring up the actual verses we're talking about so people aren't so lost.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that verse 37 in Daniel 11:37. It says, "Neither shall he regard the desire of his father, nor the desires of women, nor care for any god, for he shall magnify himself above all." And it seems like that's what Herod really actually did. Especially if you turn that the desires of women, if you say that was them desiring to give birth to the Messiah, or just give birth, period, because he was still killing children. Either way you look at it, that really fits. And then it also gives you a nice, smoother timeline where you're not jumping hundreds and hundreds of years later. You're just jumping a couple, maybe a couple hundred years later or something, which it's better, instead of like you never notice the Bible going, well, here's this, and now we're going to jump 500 to 1,000 years over here, and so.
No, it fits the natural progression of the vision, which starts really with, after the Persian, Medo-Persian Empire, and then you get to the Grecian Empire with Alexander the Great, and then the four generals, the four different kingdoms. And so the natural progression then after Antiochus Epiphanes is you get to the Roman Empire. And so it's natural that we would start seeing things about that. And you're right, a lot of our problem, I think, in modern Christian circles, and why we like to ascribe certain verses, such as the ones on your screen, to some future Antichrist, in the future, is because we simply haven't. Number one, we're ignorant of history, and number two, we haven't been taught how to connect these verses with certain things that actually have occurred in history that Daniel was prophesying about. And so, to your point, the fact that I forget where it's somewhere else in the Old Testament, in one of the minor prophets, there's the language about that is, the desire of nations come. Of course, that's talking about Christ. And so, yes, when you look at history and you look at that, Second Temple Judaism, and this idea that that the desire of women was to be the mother of the Messiah. And so then when you have Herod then butchering all of these children, and you have these women crying out, grieving, it fits that passage there. He shall not regard the desire of women. Why? Because he butchers. I mean, he wanted to kill the Messiah. He was threatened by even the prospect of someone who could, contend for the throne. And it just shows the brutality of the man. So,
yeah, and then it's also kind of like the next big event, because you have like the whole persecution of the Jews by Antiochus Epiphanes happens in 35. So what is the next big event to happen to the Jews? And to me, like the next big event is Herod killing all the children and the Messiah being born, and that kind of fits right there. That's I can't think of another big event between those two where God's like, oh, I forgot to mention that or something. So that also makes sense when you're interpreting it that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you look at that chapter. Certainly, we're introduced to the Hasmoneans, or the Maccabees, and how the Maccabees revolt against the Syrian kingdom, against the king of the north, Antiochus Epiphanes. And of course, we remember all of that with Hanukkah and all that kind of stuff. But then naturally, when you look at history, you have a period of 100 years or so of the Hasmonean dynasty. And it's in that period of time that, for the first time since Israel's exile into Babylon, they have autonomy, like true autonomy. But it's interesting then when you follow the Hasmonean dynasty and some of the workings with Pompey and how Israel was brought back under subjection, only this time to the Roman Empire, and then how that works out with Herod. And there's a lot of cool history there, because you essentially you lead off with the Hasmoneans, and the Hasmoneans are going to die off. But what's interesting is Herod married a Hasmonean. And I forget the name. It was his favorite wife, but she was of the lineage of the Hasmonean dynasty, right? And so it just naturally kind of segues into this. And so you're right. The next big thing, really, after Antiochus Epiphanes and the rebellion of the Hasmoneans, and then you have the Hasmonean dynasty, would naturally be King Herod. And what do we have in Scripture? Well, we have all of these verses that are ascribed to a future Antichrist that, lo and behold, match with precision the life and times of Herod. And so what are the chances? What are the odds, right? Of course, it's not. And it's because there is a history bears testimony to Scripture that these things have been fulfilled.
All right. What I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, because I know you weren't like really expecting to come on a show 10 minutes ago. But in verse 38, when it says, "But in his place shall he honor the god of Mazum, and the god of whom his fathers knew not, and he shall honor him with gold and silver and precious stones." How do you interpret that verse?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't know off the top of your head, that's fine, because I know you weren't like really prepared to come on. I was just I'd ask.
I'm just looking here. So, and I don't know which version you're working off of. I know King James says, "But in his place he shall honor the God of forces." And I haven't dug into
Geneva. I mean, so if you need me to pull King James instead,
no, it's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. I'm just going off of memory here. Yeah, I think the idea there is when you look at King Herod and First of all, we have to recognize he was an Edomite. He wanted. This is part of the reason why the Jews didn't really like the guy. It's because he was an Edomite. He himself couldn't even go into the temple complex. They wouldn't allow him to do that, even though he was building this great, giant, magnificent temple. But what he ended up doing instead, as it says there, he didn't honor the God of his fathers, even though he claimed to be of Jewish descent and he was the king, quote unquote, of the Jews. His allegiance was to Rome. His allegiance was to Caesar. And so when you look at that period of time, he worshipped power. He worshipped might. He even put an eagle, a Roman eagle, there somewhere in the temple complex. So he reared up these images. In fact, there's a story of how there was some teacher and his students who I think tore down this image of an eagle in homage to Rome and its might, and Herod went after them with a vengeance. But that's what Herod worshipped. He worshipped power. He was a very, very brutal man, and so it's very true that he did not honor the God of his fathers. He didn't honor the God of Israel. Instead, he honored the God of forces. He honored the God of Rome, of power, of might, of conquest, and that's evident in how he raised. Not only did he raise up images in honor to Rome, but he created different cities. I mean, so like for instance, Caesarea Philippi. Well, Caesarea, that's named after Caesar. So some of these names that we find in the New Testament of these towns, like Caesarea Philippi, these things go back to Herod, and Herod essentially building up these places and then naming them after his heroes, his idols in Rome. And so this is what the guy worshipped. This is what was important to him. It wasn't the God of his fathers.
All right, awesome, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I find this really interesting. I'm still very excited that you even came on today, and I'm still excited for even finding your channel a couple of weeks ago because, and see, I've watched probably at least 1,000 hours in the past year of like various YouTubers and from Carl Tester to Matt First to all these other guys, and I gotta really say that I love your presentation probably the best because there's a couple of these guys that do like day for year also and try to do some weird thing with Daniel 8 and the 2300 years. It's not like just the Seventh-day Adventist. There's a couple of other people who claim to be historicists and are trying to read a double fulfillment in there, and I don't like that because I feel like to read a double fulfillment into these things, you also have to say that, okay, so who's this guy who comes out of 4 kingdoms, and you still have to have a king of Greece in the future. If you say there's double fulfillment, and then you got to have 4 kings that come from him, and then you got to have this other king. Is that going to happen again? Like, that's why I hate the double fulfillment. When I first started learning it, I thought it was interesting, but then when I really started to dig into the text, I was like, wait a minute, like maybe we shouldn't be doing this. And then you find out, well, day for a year, there's not even a day in the text. It says evening, mornings, 2300s, and you're making this into 2300 days when it's 2300 evening, mornings, and then years, and you got 840,075 evening and mornings, and that can't fit, So just they do these weird things. I'm like, so that's why I really like your channel a lot, because I don't see these weird things that I can't find like scriptural for it. Now, maybe someone new, and maybe once you get real studied, you can find out like maybe me and Scott missed something. But I would say, like, for new people, I would first recommend them checking out your material, because you're not doing any of the crazy stuff, which I think is confusing people, which I think
Mhm.
makes them lose interest in studying this. And I think when you study this, you can get a fuller like, when you understand it the right way and the proper way, I think it opens up the rest of the Bible.
Oh
Whereas
yeah.
Whereas if you're coming at it from like this way where, oh, this could mean 2,300 years, you're like, well, I'm not understanding that. Am I stupid? And then you're wasting all this energy trying to figure out how they even got to that, when actually they shouldn't, in my opinion, they should never came to that point.
Right.
So that's why I strongly recommend, if someone wants to understand this, even before you watch any of my material, go watch Scott Clem's material, because he's got it nicely laid out. It's I just, and like I said, I don't find any kind of like craziness, or where you just stretch the text beyond its meaning, you know. So
Yeah, well, no, I appreciate that and appreciate the compliments there. Yeah, I mean, that's what I tried to do. I tried to stick to the text, and um, in light, and this is where it gets to, understanding what the overall, it helps understand what the overall theme of Daniel is and how the book is broken down. Daniel really is prophesying about Israel's second term of national existence. From the return from Babylon, the regathering into the land, the building up of Jerusalem and the temple again, up until 70 AD, when they were destroyed once again. And so, the history is, before we even take anything and look into the future, just the history of that book and how things line up with historical events. That is interesting enough. And I echo your remarks and concerns about dual fulfillment. I think some of that is holding on to dual fulfillment is just a nice way to save face, maybe with your crowd, your stripe that still thinks that a lot of these things are going to happen in the future. Yeah, I don't see it that way, and I think people can get pretty fast and loose when it comes to dual fulfillments. I mean, what objective criteria are you using in order to constitute that something has a dual fulfillment? And like you said, especially when you look at Daniel 8, there's a lot of other details that have to match up. And the fact of the matter is it's near impossible for something like that to happen today, or even into the future. And then when you match that against history, boy, it's right there. And it makes scripture come alive. That's the exciting thing. It's like, wow, like, um, God was truly foretelling things, and it came to pass. Like, that's exciting stuff when you see prophecy unfold before your very eyes, how it unfolded through history. That's what's really cool. That's what's exciting to me, anyway.
yeah, see, I was just bringing up to people's attention. This is in my show notes too. I put St. Jerome's commentary on Daniel in the show notes, and it's translated by Gleason L. Archer. And so St. Jerome, he's this guy in 400 AD. So for people to think that, what me and Scott Clem might be talking about here is crazy, it's like, this is how early Christians even interpreted the Bible. This has been forgotten about, and kind of I don't know what the best word to say, distorted over the centuries. Because when people were coming out of the Reformation, Martin Luther, Calvin, and many other, Andrew Willett, and many others were saying that Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled Daniel 8. Daniel 9:27 was fulfilled by Jesus. It's not future. And it was the Jesuits who came out with historicism and preterism. And why did they do it? They said, it was to take the heat off of Rome being called the Antichrist. So they said, oh no, this was all fulfilled in the past. It's not about Rome. That's the preterist view, which winds up becoming like a kind of a full preterist view for many people. And then it's like, or then you got futurism, like, no, it can't be Rome. It's some guy in the future. Right. And that's when they broke off that 70th week of Daniel, threw it in the future.
Exactly.
And for people who think that me and Scott Clem are wrong about this too, one of your top dispensationalist authors, Clarence Larkin, says in this book, Dispensational Truth, he says this exact thing that about these three schools of prophecy, three schools of interpretation: historicism, which me and Scott hold to, preterism, and futurism. And he even himself says preterism and futurism was developed by the Jesuits, and he said and futurism is the interpretation he holds. So
yeah, exactly. And just I'm not correcting you. You misspoke
no,
earlier. No. And I just want the audience to understand that you said something about the Jesuits and I think you said preterism and historicism, but what you meant is
futurism.
You clarified. You clarified it. Yeah. So I just want the audience to make sure that it's preterism and futurism in particular, the things that and that's documented history, right? That's the counter Reformation. That's when the Jesuit order was created, it was created in order to be that counter Reformation against those who were protesting the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, the Protestant movement by and large was historicist, and they had the view that the Pope was Antichrist. It was, and there were many obviously who believed that he was the Antichrist, but he was certainly an Antichrist. And so you had, it's interesting when you look at the history about futurism and preterism and how these things developed. And of course, we're dealing with the ramification of those things today. So, just to kind of throw my 2 cents in there, one has to wonder. So in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, I believe it talks about, there'll be, of course, it alludes to an end times delusion. There'll be a delusion in the future. Many people will be deceived. And I've often wondered if things like this idea, like these doctrines, these teachings of futurism and or preterism or even dispensationalism, where as you mentioned, things have gotten greatly distorted, and people just flat out are ignorant, really, of a lot of history and what Christians have historically believed. And of course, now we have all of these different theories, and the predominant view today is a futurist view of a future 7 years and a future Antichrist and a pre-tribulation rapture and all these things. And it's startling for many Christians. They just don't realize, or they want to deny that that this was not the predominant view of history, that this is a new view. It's novel. It's if I can put it this way, for some of my Baptist friends out there, it's a departure from the old paths. People like to talk about the old paths. Let's get to the old paths. Well, dispensationalism in this futurism view is a departure from that, and that's exactly what people hold on to. So, hey, listen, Chris,
Oh yeah. No, you got to go. You got your son's game.
I do. But hey, this is a treat, man. No,
gosh, thank you for stopping by. That made my day. I love talking to you. It's like it's uplifting to me just to hear it. Just to hear someone else, man. It just does my soul good, man.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Well, appreciate it, man. All right, take care.
It was nice to meet you.
Yeah.
It was nice to meet you, Pastor.
Yeah, dude, that was awesome. I want to get to Kevin's question. I didn't mean to ignore it. I knew he had to run soon, but Kevin, the main difference between preterism and historicism is that preterism believes almost everything is fulfilled in the past. Now, partial preterists and historicists might be a little bit more similar, but the one thing I noticed with partial preterists is they seem to put more focus on the Jews. They seem to neglect the Vatican being a problem in the world at all, while the historicists point more towards the Vatican fulfilling certain parts of history, like being the second beast of Revelation and things like that. But historicists don't believe everything's fulfilled. Now, I think most of the book of Daniel's fulfilled. Other historicists I know think most of the book of Daniel's fulfilled. But what we don't believe is that all of Revelation's fulfilled. And there's some disagreement with, once you get to chapter 6 of Revelation, how that's interpreted. So historicists kind of interpret that a little bit differently. Me, myself, it's I see more of when it talks about Mystery Babylon, I personally think that points more towards the Vatican. and so that's kind of got like a more of an ongoing fulfillment. Others might have a different opinion, but to me, like the partial preterist is focusing so much on like Jerusalem and the Jews. And to me, a lot of the partial preterists start to sound like a bit like futurists in a way, and almost a little bit dispensationalist. And what I mean by that is, it's like I feel like that's almost like you're creating a third vine. And I think Revelation basically speaks of two vines. You got this vine of heaven, that's Jesus. And that's the vine you want to be grafted into and part of. And then you got the vine of the earth that's thrown into the winepress of the wrath of God. And I don't see like any other thing you can belong to. It's either the vine of heaven or the vine of earth. And I could be wrong. Maybe there's something else. I mean, I'm open to this. I'm still learning. I'm realizing that a lot of people have really twisted the meaning of Revelation and Daniel as I was growing up. So it's like, and I'm just starting to understand how much that has been distorted from, earlier, like in the 1600s and what was taught, and before the 1600s compared to now, and this great distortion of biblical understanding that has gone on in the past 4 centuries. So so that's kind of where I come from with the differences. I don't know. Sola, you want to maybe chime in on anything?
Yeah. So basically, partial preterism says that everything except for the second coming was fulfilled in 70 AD. There might be some variances on that, but by and large, most partial preterists believe everything happened in 70 AD, except for second coming, which also would include the resurrection from the dead physically, right? Historicists see things more as a flowing through history and fulfillment of various prophecies through history, and not just in Jerusalem in 70 AD, but through time itself. So you can look at certain events in time and you can see that prophecy was fulfilled at that point in time, given whatever passage you're reading. They also don't believe that everything has been fulfilled yet. So that would be the big difference, I would say, between the two.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all that. So, you got any other thoughts you had? Because I know, I'm sorry, I promised Scott, man, if he came on, I'd give him priority. So I didn't mean to ignore you or let you have a word in edgewise. I just knew Scott had a very short time, and I wanted to get him in because I gave him very short notice. So.
Oh no, man, that was cool. I was glad he was able to come on, and I stayed quiet so that way you could ask your questions and dialogue with him. I thought that was important, so that was cool.
Okay, I kind of got the feeling that you understood all that, so that's why I wasn't panicking. So, but I still want to say something just in case, So.
Yeah. No, you're good. I follow. I flow.
Okay, awesome, dude. That's why I love talking to you, man, because it's like you kind of catch on without me having to explain something, and you're not coming back to me later like, Chris, you hurt my feelings.
No. No way, man. No, I'm good. But I did find interesting, this fortress ordeal, the God of fortress in verse 38. And what I find interesting is in verse 31, I'm not sure exactly how to take all this, but in verse 31 of Daniel 11, the sanctuary is called the fortified sanctuary, or the sanctuary fortress, which uses the same word as in verse 38, God of fortresses. And then we read in verse 36, the king, whoever this king is, does as he pleases and exalts and magnifies himself above every deity. So it's almost like he's making himself the ultimate deity, the ultimate God. And then we read in verse 37, this same king will not respect the gods of his fathers. Now, that phrase is, I believe, always used to refer to a Jew or an Israelite. And
awesome point, man.
Right. And then it also says, and I'm not sure how to take exact this one. And I've heard parts of his position, and I do agree that the text needs to flow from the third beast to the fourth beast. So I agree with that completely. And I'm not super dogmatic on this, but it says, not even the God loved by women. I'm not sure how to take that. That's what this version says that I have. The ESV reads,
In 37?
yeah. So I was reading from the New English Translation. And it reads, let me see. Oh,
Do you want me to pull it up on the screen, or?
Sure. Yeah, it'll make it a little easier.
Okay, New English Translation, you said.
Or I can share my screen if you want me to. If that makes
Oh
sense.
yeah, if you want to do that, it's however you want to do it. If you okay, here we go. I'll just pull your screen up since you already got it. And here
So-
I'm gonna reduce us so people can see it easier.
Okay, so I'll go over real quick again what I said. So here in verse 31, it says, his forces will rise up and profane the fortified sanctuary, or the temple and fortress. Now, what I was pointing out is here, the fortified sanctuary is that word for fortified or fortress is the same word used in verse 38. So I was kind of pointing that out. Not sure if that is a connection or anything at all, but it is interesting that the Bible does call the sanctuary a fortified sanctuary, or a sanctuary of fortress. So to continue back, verse 36, this king, whoever we believe this king is, will do as he pleases and exalts and magnifies himself above every deity. And I think that's important here, and I'll point that out here in a second. And he will utter presumptuous things against the God of gods. So that would be Yahweh. He will succeed until the time of wrath is completed. So that time of wrath is completed is important as well too. What is that time of wrath? What does it refer to? What is that wrath pointed towards? I would argue that is towards the Jews and what happens in 70 AD. And the reason why I do that is it's also talked about in chapter 9 of Daniel, verses 25 through 27. This wrath that's poured out on the Jews. But even if you don't agree with that, that has to refer to something in the first century, if you hold to that position, not the futurist one. And then I'll continue reading. For what has been decreed must occur. So that decreed wrath must happen. And verse 37, so this same king will not respect the gods of his fathers. And I pointed out this phrase, I believe, is always used in the Bible to refer to Yahweh. Not even the God loved by women. Now, I'm not sure how to take the way this translation translates that
Wow. So
passage. That's
that kind
weird.
of.
And that's what I was trying to point out. I'm not sure how to take that. That's weird. Because
No, that's something to think about, man. I mean, we should always, think about this. Like I said, I'm still going over 1136. I just thought Scott made a lot of good points that I liked.
yes.
But then it's like when you read these other translations, you might stumble across something you don't like, so.
Right. So I'm not sure how to take that. Like the ESV, which is usually what I default to, it says, he shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers or to the one beloved by women. And that would kind of fit more with what Scott was saying and how his interpretation referring to, I believe he's saying it refers to Mary, right?
I think it might have referred to Herod and
Or Herod.
all the women who were expecting to give birth, were hoping to give birth to the Messiah. So that would be the one beloved by women, right?
Right. Yeah. That seems to kind of help his position more. I'm not sure what the KJV nor the desire. Okay, so this one says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers nor the desire of women. That would fit my interpretation a little bit more. But it is interesting, and I do believe when there is a phrase or a passage that has such a wide range of interpretation translation, excuse me, by different translations. It's a hard phrase to translate. So I'm not sure how to take this just yet.
I'm gonna have to really look at it because, like, the King James, if that's correct. That flow, like I could see why he goes with that what he comes to. I'm gonna have to really do like a Hebrews word study now, because I didn't realize there was that big of a difference between translations. And sometimes, these newer translations, they do have really good points. So
Right. So I'm gonna continue something my thought real quick. So this same king in verse 36, he will not respect any god. It's kind of repeating what it said here in verse 36, where it says he will exalt himself above every deity. It says he will not respect any god. He will elevate himself above them all. Then it goes on to say what he will honor is a god of fortresses. Now that word fortresses is the same one in verse 31 used of the sanctuary of fortress. But what's interesting, it just says he will not respect any god in verse 37. But then in verse 38 it says the same he, I believe, will honor a god of fortresses. So it's almost maybe he has made himself a god of fortress, and this fortress is that sanctuary fortress. And the reason why I say that is my interpretation of this is obviously the John Giscola interpretation, which is a minority interpretation, but that is exactly what John Giscola did. And that is something I would ask Scott Clem if I was talking to him. That's something I would point out at least. I mean, maybe he understands all this better with his position, but
well, maybe we could have a talk with all three of us, like do a show, schedule a future show, and find like a convenient time to do that.
right.
Um,
And Herod may fit, I think, because he said it was Herod, right? Herod may fit all this.
yeah, I
I'm
think that's what he's saying, because it seems like that's the next. See, I guess the reason why I liked it too was I don't think there should be like a real huge jump, but still, I mean, that's not that huge of a jump to go from Herod to 70 AD. But I thought, like,
right,
like Herod killing all the firstborn children and trying to kill the Messiah, that
right,
that's a big event in Jewish history
right,
too. Because
yeah,
like I don't know any other time that's happened. You had Antiochus do where he was pretty brutal to the Jews, but then it's like the next thing we know of is Herod doing this, because I mean that's cruel too, and
right,
there's even like a Bible passage about like Rachel and crying out for her children or something like that. I can't think of the exact verse, but I think you know what I mean.
right,
Um, but eh, eh, uh, so it's like, and I think that would be, if there's a prophecy that's given us like a timeline, that would be the next thing that it might stop at. But I'm not saying it has to do that. But I'm just
right,
saying, me personally, I'm only looking at like huge events, and I want something that where there's a more gentle progression of scripture, like not 500 years later, 1,000 years later, this is
right,
happening, 2,000 years later, this is happening, and it's like I'm looking for something that's more gradual, and I
right.
feel like what he said fit the flow better. So
Well, one thing I do have a concern with holding to the Herod position, it kind of keeps me from really holding it seems like this king is a Jew, and Herod was an Edomite who would be a Hebrew but not an Israelite. And so that is one thing that I would have, he would probably I would ask him to talk about more and explain more, because these phrases, gods of his fathers, the sanctuary, the fortress, all makes it seem like this king would be a Jew. So
hmm. Okay, the only other Jew that you think might fit that though would be John of Giscala, right?
yes, yeah, John of Giscala, and there's also what's his name, Eleazar. Uh, was another possible candidate. I think John fits all of it more than him, but that would be another possible candidate is Eleazar, who was a leader of one of the other zealot groups, the Sicarii group.
Hmm.
But either way, I mean, like I said, I'm not dogmatic, but what I do like and I do appreciate about Scott's handling is that he's flowing from, Medo Persia to Greece, then to Rome, and events that happened in the first century with Rome. Whether mine or his is more correct, I either one at the end of the day. But I don't see a 2,000-year ongoing gap between these events. And whether it's the dispensational position or the SDA position, you have to do a lot of resting the text to hold these positions instead of just letting them flow naturally.
The only, the one thing though, if this is Herod, when I'm reading this text, is it's like down in verse 40. Like as far as like the Geneva translation, it says, "At the end of time shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of north shall come against him." And that sounds like it's referring to the previous 4 verses from 36 through 39. Is that the same? Do you think that's the same king in verse 40?
Let me see. So verse 40, the king of the south or the king of the north?
Okay, it says the king of the south shall push at him. Who's him? Who do you? I would say him is referring to the previous verses from 36 through 39.
Yes, yeah, I would agree. Yeah, same
Okay.
he. Yeah, the king in verse 36. Yeah, I'd agree.
All right. Yeah, so that would have to be something I'll have to watch his video again, because I've only watched it one time, and I guess I was just like so fascinated at the Harad thing, and it sounded
Right.
so it sounded like it made so much sense. I don't know if I paid attention to how he interpreted 40, so I'm gonna have to kind of rewatch that video. But I still recommend a series, because I still like the fact that and people disagree with after what he says after verses 36. I still think there's a lot of interesting things to consider.
Oh yeah,
Um,
very much so. Yeah.
and I think he definitely has everything before verse 35 pretty much like. I think it's a pretty solid interpretation. I can't find any issues with it.
Right. And he holds to 35 and before, referring to uh
Yeah, what is it, like 35 on up to, is it
20
22?
21 would be
21.
Antiochus. Is what
Okay,
I would
yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah. I think, I think that's what he's saying, is like it's either 21 or 22 to 35 is Antiochus, is like depicting events surrounding Antiochus.
Yeah.
If I remember right.
Yeah, if that's the case, I would agree with him. Yeah.
I've been kind of stuck so much on breaking down Daniel 8. I'm not that fresh on Daniel 11 as I should be, so.
Oh, same here. Yeah, Daniel 8 has been a huge focus.
But yeah, I mean, and I kind of want to just make sure I go over this one point, because this is the one of the main reasons why I wanted to do this show, is just to discuss how this little horn in Daniel 8, this cannot be Rome.
Yeah, I told you I kind of for a while contemplated that position, because there are things that parallel what's talked about with Rome, but then there are things that don't make sense. But at the end of the day, um, those parallels don't matter as much as um, which beast the little horn is on. And I'll let you go through your talk on this and everything, but that's what I've come to conclude, that it doesn't make a lot of sense. You have to twist the text a lot to say it is Rome.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna do a quick walkthrough. I'm not gonna go too crazy into this, man, because it's like people heard me talk about this enough. This is just kind of something new I just kind of spotted in the text, because I'm just gonna kind of just refresh people with what I'm gonna go over at the bottom, because we know in Daniel 8 it tells you it gives you this vision in the first half, And then after verse 14, it's going to tell you what those first 14 verses mean. And so it talks about this in verse 7. And I saw come unto the ram and being moved against him. And I saw him come unto the ram. Well, maybe I should go one verse earlier. So in verse 6, it says, and he came up unto the ram that had 2 horns. So it's talking about this goat with 1 horn that comes up to this ram that has 2 horns, whom I had seen standing by the river, and ran into him in his fierce rage. So the goat with the 1 horn is running into the ram with his fierce rage. And I saw him come unto the ram, and being moved against him, he smote the ram and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand against him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped on him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his power. Therefore the great goat waxed exceedingly great, and when he was at the strongest, his great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 that appeared towards the 4 winds of heaven. So this is clearly saying that there's this goat with 1 large horn. His horn gets broken. 4 come up out of it that go in the 4 directions of heaven. And out of one of them, so one of them referring to one of the 4, it came up a little horn which waxed very great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the pleasant land. And when you get down here to verses 21, it's going to tell you what these symbols mean. And the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn that's between his eyes is the first king. So just one singular king. It's not saying kings, right? And that is the first king. And that is broken. So we remember the large horn gets broken. 4 stood up for it are 4 kingdoms, which shall stand up of that nation, but not in a strength. So kingdoms in the Hebrew language is masculine plural, and it's not just the Seventh-day Adventists that argue that this little horn that's rising up is Rome. There's others that argue this in the past, but the reason why they're wrong is and now Seventh-day Adventists will try to say, oh, okay, them in this verse up here, in verse 9, it says out of one of them. They say this Hebrew word for them is masculine plural, and that horns is feminine. And horns, and so when it says, and 4 it came up 4 in verse 8, it's saying that this 4 is horns, and that's feminine. And okay, but winds is feminine too, but they'll say it's Rome's coming out of these 4 winds of heaven, but heaven, they say, is masculine. So therefore them refers to heaven, and out of one of these 4 winds comes Rome. And therefore it's this when it says out of one of them, talking about the little horn, they try to say, based on the Hebrew grammar rules, it's got the gender's got to match up, and them's masculine plural, heaven's masculine, therefore, and the 4 winds come out of the heaven, therefore them refers to the winds, not to the 4 horns. But if you can see here, even in the Hebrew, you don't even see the word horns. Everyone just kind of supplies that term right there and adds horns, but horns really isn't even in the Hebrew. But a lot of the reasons why it's supplied is because it comes out of because these 4 come out of this great horn. So they already just say it's 4 horns, but that's never said in the text. But the thing is, heaven, even though it's masculine, and the winds are still feminine, and this horn's not coming out of heaven itself. These winds are just talking about directions. So it's not like the horn came out of heaven, which would be masculine. So in order for them to make that thing, and I don't even think you have to understand all these grammar rules. It's not even necessary. You can almost everyone historically who has read this normally thinks it means the horn's broken, and of it 4 come up, and everyone, most people historically have always thought these 4 refers to the 4 kingdoms down in verses 21 and 22. But right here it tells us that the four that stood up are four kingdoms, and kingdoms is masculine plural. So this four is masculine plural because it represents four kingdoms. So when it says out of one of them, even by Hebrew grammar rules, it's still it's got the word them has to point to the four, since the four represent the four kingdoms, which is masculine plural. And even if you want to say it's talking about four horns are still symbolic of the four kingdoms, right? So it's still a symbol of this masculine attribute that's still pointing to. So it still makes more sense. But like I said, the word horns isn't even in the text of 22, nor is it in the text of verse what is it, 8 and 9. Yeah, it's not even in the text of verse 8. And then we see this little horn. So it says, and that goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn that's between his eyes is the first king, and that is broken, four stood up for it, are four kingdoms which shall stand of that nation, but not in his strength, meaning that's not going to come from Alexander the Great's posterity. And everyone agrees this king of Greece is Alexander the Great. Every single person agrees to this. I don't know anyone who doesn't. And in the end of their kingdom, when the rebellious shall be consumed, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. Now, everybody who argues about what this little horn represents, whether they think it's Rome or whether they think the little horn represents Antiochus Epiphanes, all believe verse 23 when it says a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences is referring to the little horn. And I agree with that too. So in the end of their kingdom, when the rebellious shall be consumed, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall rise up. But this word, it says a king. Notice it doesn't say a kingdom. It says a singular king, right? I don't see a plural of kings either. It just says a king. Just like in the previous verses, in verse 21, it says the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. Just a singular king, right? No one argues that there's multiple kings. Everyone says this first king's Alexander the Great. This great horn is Alexander the Great, the first king. Singular here, it's singular here. So now when we say that this king also in verse 23 refers to the little horn, we notice singular. And so I don't know how else you could interpret this but to think it's Antiochus Epiphanes, because to say it's Rome, you would have to say a kingdom, or you'd have to say there had to be some word that represents a plurality of kings, in my opinion. And I don't know what you want to add to that, because that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah. So go ahead and share my screen,
Okay, yeah, sure.
please. So their interpretation makes me think of when Peter says that prophecy is not a private interpretation, and that handling that you just talked about with well, the winds, the horns, and the gender and all that. They're interpreting the symbols, and why that's important is because, like you mentioned, this part, what they would call the mare, is a divinely inspired interpretation of the symbols that are already given. So they're giving their own private interpretation of the horns and the winds, and they're ignoring the divinely inspired interpretation given here in verses 22 and 23. And why that's important is because they want to say it is coming up from one of the winds, and so it can be Rome in that case. But if it's coming up from one of the four horns or the four kingdoms, then it's still the Greek kingdom. It's not the Roman kingdom. And that ruins their interpretation. But if you go to the divinely inspired interpretation here in verse 22 and 23, as you pointed out, this deceitful king, so this little horn, which they agree with, comes up from their rule or their kingdom.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that right before you said that. I was like, oh, I forgot that point.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. Really good point. And when I was talking to that gentleman the other night, I was building up to that point, and then he left right before them. But it is really a very crucial point to make to them.
Yeah, that in the end of their kingdom. So which kingdom is that? That's the goat kingdom. And the end of their kingdom, when the rebellious shall be consumed, and I interpret the rebellious. I'm not, or maybe your version might say the transgressors. When the rebellious or the transgressors shall be consumed, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall rise. So this king comes up at the end of their kingdom. Well, we know after 146 BC, their kingdom started to disappear. Rome took over and conquered one of them. And then in 133 BC, Rome took over another kingdom. And then by 30 BC at the latest, Rome had completely conquered all of the Grecian kingdoms. So before their kingdoms end, so this has to happen before 146 BC, because that's when their kingdom started to end. And so this did come right at the end of their kingdom, because we're only talking about 20 years earlier, right? I mean, this is just 20 years earlier. And you have this king of Antiochus Epiphanes, and we know that the Jews were very rebellious right at that time, right? Because they were selling the priesthood and obtaining the priesthood through deceitful means and things like that. Through like I think it was either Melanos or Jason. Were obtaining the priesthood in a wrongful way, and they weren't practicing the rituals properly and things like that. And so so it looks like the Jews have become kind of rebellious against God, starting to Hellenize, and it happens to be right in the last 20 years of these kingdoms. And then you have Antiochus show up on the scene. Well, 20, 30 years, last 20, 30 years of their kingdom. And so to me, it fits so much of the text, and it plainly says at the end of their kingdom, it shall stand up. So I don't know how to get around that. Also, one other thing you notice is there's nothing about winds from verse 21 to 23. We see nothing about the directions of heaven. So this king does not come out of one of those directions of heaven. And we see nothing about winds, right?
Yeah. That's because in here, I think it's pretty obvious here when you just read the text. These four conspicuous horns in verse 8 grow or come out toward the four winds of heaven. So it's pretty clear that these four horns, each one is in one of these points of the wind. So in other words, north, south, east, and west. So they take up the whole four winds. So if you say the wind, you're saying one of these four horns. It's really a distinction without a difference. And the text here in verse 22, 23 makes that pretty clear in my personal opinion. But one thing else real quick that they need to prove, if you do talk to an SD, what they need to prove is that a horn becomes a beast kingdom. Because if you look in chapter 7, the beast kingdoms are all different beasts. You got the bear, you got the lion, you got the cheetah, you got that fierce unknown beast. And then the horns are all on the various beast systems. Not a single horn becomes a different beast system. So for example, let's say there's four horns on the bear in chapter 7. All those four horns on that bear are still the bear. So they're still Medo Persia. They don't become Greece. And likewise, if there's any horns on the cheetah, they stay a part of that cheetah or that Greek kingdom. They don't become the Roman kingdom. And so they have to prove that this is what happens here in this text in chapter 8, which we don't see any example in the book of Daniel at all of that happening that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and once again, when it says the four that stand up in its place, you'll notice the word horns is not in the text. It just says the four that will stand up in its place. And then in verse 22, it tells you those four are four kingdoms. And the word horns is not even mentioned in the text. Now, I'm not saying that it's improper to add horns into the English text if someone did that, since they are coming out of a nation, but and they're coming out of the first king, and maybe you might try to say that it's four horns that are rising up, but the text doesn't say it. So you got to make
Right.
that, you got to be able to make that argument that horns actually does refer to a kingdom. But even if you do manage to make that argument that the word horns should be in the English text, it still doesn't get around the fact that it pretty much is saying that the kings are rising out of their kingdom.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. Whether the words horn are in there or not, it still doesn't help their position in any way, shape, or form, in my personal opinion.
yeah, when you read, I'm just going to bring up this is Young's literal translation, which stays pretty much right to the original Hebrew. And it says, "And the young he goat that hath exerted himself very much, and when it is strong, broken hath been the great horn that doth come up a vision of four in its place at the four winds of heaven." So it says that the four that come up are at the four winds of heaven. So this is just a description of the four horns, because it's telling you of the four that rise up in the place of the great horn. This looks like an obvious just description that they're at the four winds of heaven.
Yes.
And so when it says, and out of one of them come forth hath a little horn, and so it makes more sense for that then to point to the four that came up in the place of the great horn.
Yep.
Especially when you read down at the bottom, it plainly tells you it's kingdoms. So,
Yeah, and that flows with history, exactly what happened.
yeah,
Right?
that's the thing too. When you have history that says this is how it happened, and like no secular authority, no atheist will say, well, no, Alexander's kingdom wasn't broken up into four. Like, everyone agrees to that, whether you believe in the Bible or not. Everyone agrees with that. Everyone agrees that out of these four, you had this guy that goes and does this persecution to the Jews, or maybe you call it a judgment against the Jews from God. And we know the Jews were Hellenizing at that point. And so it's like, when you got all this other stuff going on, it's like, why not just accept the plain understanding when that's what it looks like? Unless you've got something so much better that fits so much better. But when you got to reach and reach and reach, and then you want to say it's like 2,300 years, when the verse says it's evening mornings, 2,300 evening mornings. It's like, well, if you times that by 2,300 years, you're going to get 840,075 evening mornings, which is too many evening mornings. And you also have to explain, why did God use the word evening morning, right? Why is he using evening morning? Why didn't he just say days? Because the Seventh-day Adventists and like to just think, oh, well, what it is we turn evening mornings into days, and then we take the year for day prophecy, which was done in Ezekiel, even though it's not said it should be done here, but we're going to do it just because it was done in Ezekiel and Numbers, right? And we're going to change the Bible and make it say days, and then do year for day prophecy. But they don't even explain why God even uses evening mornings in the first place.
Sounds like
So,
a private interpretation to me.
yeah, because God might mean, I want 2,000 evening mornings, whether you think it comes from 2,300 days, or maybe it's a combination of evening morning, since it's written as a singular unit in the Hebrew. It could mean 1,150 days of a combined evening and morning, or it could mean sacrifices, since the previous verses are talking about the continual sacrifice.
Yeah.
Um,
And also verse 13, the vision is concerns. The very first thing mentioned is the burnt offering.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a good point you make. The first thing it says,
Yep.
not the last thing, not the middle thing. The first thing it says is it's talking about the continual.
Yep.
Which,
So it makes sense the evenings and mornings would be there with after the 2300. It makes sense if you have that context.
Yeah, and we know in Exodus 29 and Numbers 28, it talks about an evening and a morning sacrifice. But SDAs like to say, well, they talked about the morning sacrifice first, so therefore verse 14 can't be talking about sacrifices. But, I mean, we know evenings normally come first in Jewish culture and then morning. So maybe even though the passage talks about morning sacrifices first, that doesn't necessarily mean they were done first. I mean, I don't know. Or maybe they were stopped first. Maybe the evening sacrifice was the first sacrifice stopped.
Right.
So who knows? But I wouldn't just assume after reading, all these verses talking about the sanctuary and the continual, which we know consisted of an evening and morning sacrifice. I mean, why just rule out that verse 14 can't be talking about sacrifices? And I'm not saying that 100% verse 14 absolutely is. I believe it is, but at least I'm taking the words evening and morning, and I'm figuring out a way for those words to be in the text, to have meaning, and to fit prophecy. So whether someone wants to say, no, God just means, 2,300 complete days, or maybe this is going to go on continually, evening and morning. So that God's using evening morning as a merism, and you want to argue maybe it's a merism, that means continually. This is like just a continual persecution, evening and morning for 2,300 days, right? So maybe that's your argument. Okay, but you're still getting evening mornings that way. And maybe you think it's 2,300 completed days, or maybe you just think evening, morning continually, but they're also counted as units. So a unit of evening, a unit of morning, you take 1,150 evenings, 1,150 mornings, you get 1,150 days. So that's another possibility of still thinking it's days, but you're going to add up the evenings and mornings. Just because of the way the Hebrew is, I know it's a little bit different in the Septuagint. Depending on what translation of the Septuagint you use, you could say that it's a mixture of both. But then if you want to try going that direction, you're also going to have to contend with the Septuagint saying 2,400 evening and mornings.
Right. And it flows better with the text, and when all this is happening and that's why they have to disconnect all of this with the 2300 and go through this huge ordeal with the Mare and the Kazo and all this stuff, because they have to disconnect what this little horn does with the time prophecy that is given in here, which is 2300 evenings and mornings. Because if it's connected, then it's happening during the third beast, the third kingdom, which is Greece.
Probably the biggest question I also have for people that try to basically for Seventh-day Adventists, because what they try to say is the 2,300 years starts in 457 BC, but we know the ram doesn't even fight the goat, which is Greece, until 334 BC. So why aren't we starting the prophecy, the 2,300, if it was years? Why are we not starting it at 334 BC? Why does it have to start at 357 BC? Because if the 2,300 has to do with this vision, right?
Right.
And then probably like the best question I would have also is, who read that question in verse 8:13, which is, I heard a certain Holy One speaking, and a certain Holy One saith to the wonderful numberer who is speaking, till when is the vision of the continual sacrifice and of the transgression and astonishment to make both the sanctuary and the host a treading down? Who in the history of reading the Bible, of all the commentators, who applied this question to the ram and the goat? Because everyone I know who ever spoke about this question, whether you think it's Rome or whoever else, or what, even if you think it's 2,300 years, who else thought that this question applied to the ram and the goat? Everyone I ever read, every single commentary I've read from probably like 150 AD all up to 1800, and even newer commentaries, they all think this question only refers to the little horn and to the sanctuary and to everything that's going on there. They don't think that this is referring to the ram and the goat.
Yeah.
I've never heard one of them say it ever. And that's my challenge to Seventh-day Adventists or anyone who thinks this is 2,300 and does a similar thing. It's like, who thinks that this question referred to anything else? It referred to the ram or the goat. So,
Yeah, I'm not aware of any. Yeah. So what I think I know what they would say with starting at 457 BC is they say the whole vision, the chazon, starts with verse 3. So whenever this ram having two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Whenever that is happening, so it's referring to different kings, I believe, from Medo Persia. Whenever that's happening, I believe they would say that's when the visions start, which is apparently, according to them, 457 BC. I think that's what they would say in response to your question.
yeah, and a lot of chazon and chazon and mare, and I always felt like whenever you quorum, it's like, but chazon and mare.
Oh, man. It's so, honestly, if you just read the text, and I made this suggestion in my video, if you take your hard copy of your Bible, go through Daniel 8 and Daniel 9, and mark whenever the word vision, look it up, and mark a C or an M where that word vision is, and it'll tell you if that'll easily tell you if it's chazon or mare. So you can read through the whole text when it mentions the word chazon and mare, and you can see there is absolutely zero reason to link the chazon or the mare with Daniel 9 and its mention of mare and chazon. There's no reason to at all. It makes no sense. There has to be some external reason why you'd want to connect those.
Yeah, and I guess the only other point I can make is that there's different visions throughout this whole prophecy. So it's not like it's considered one vision, like the whole thing's one vision. Because it's like he's got a vision of a ram, then he's got a vision of a goat. Then he's also, if you look down into verse 8, it says, and the young he goat hath exerted himself very much, and when it is strong, broken hath been the great horn, and come up doth a vision of four in its place. And this word vision here, should bring up the interlinear so people can kind of see this. But this is another word for vision. I should probably say Daniel 8:8, so I can just. But stuff makes me start all over here. But let's see here. I'm almost there. Okay, some of these versions say and came up four notable ones, but this word notable, it's actually this word called kazuth, which is kind of like chazon, and it means vision or conspicuousness. But normally, in it, there's like a lot of it's like prophetic prophecy is as a lot of times is what it means too. Oh, I thought I had it right here. Well, right here in these footnotes, it says Isaiah 29:11, the vision, which they have in parentheses, prophecy of the whole is become to you as the words of a sealed writing. So, so this word also has to do with like prophetic meanings and things like that also. And so
That's
it's
a good
just
point. Yep.
and another thing about using that word there too is, so it says the vision of the four. So when it's to me, having that word kazuth there, I think that's how the pronunciation of it. You would think that if that's a vision, so it's got some prophetic meaning to it, that maybe that when it's elaborating on it down here, it's not just, oh, we just want to tell you 4 kingdoms is going to rise up, but other than that, we don't have nothing more to say about it. We're just going to start talking about the papal antichrist. We're just going to jump to the papal antichrist. It's like, yeah, we said it's a vision, but the main prophecy of it is that it's just going to be 4, and let's move on.
Right. Or it's what it's doing is saying that out of one of these 4, the little horn who will persecute the Jews rises from one of those 4. Which one makes more sense? Which one flows better with the text?
Yeah, I would definitely say the one that's persecuting the Jews, since we got the ladder into their kingdom and all that other stuff. It's like, okay, it just all flows with history. And about the only other thing I can say is, Porphyrius or Porphyry. Some people spell his name Porphyry, or sometimes it's spelled this way: Porphyrius. So Porphyrius or Porphyry. He was like a skeptic of the Bible. Was trying to trying to say that, okay, we can't argue that this is not accurate, fulfilled prophecy. This looks very accurate. So instead, in order to attack the Bible, what we're going to say is that it was written later. It was written in 150 BC or around 150 BC. And that's why it looks like fulfilled prophecy, because it's not really fulfilled prophecy. It's actually someone who forged a document, and he's claiming to be Daniel, and he's claiming to give a prophecy, but he's not really giving a prophecy. He's really just writing about history. And that's the whole reason why St.Jerome wrote his commentary in 400 AD was to attack Porphyry or Porphyrius for trying to claim that, oh, this was written after the fact, and St. Jerome is saying no, and St. Jerome saying no, this is fulfilled prophecy. It has to do with Antiochus Epiphanes and all this. And so this prophecy has been used to help people understand that this book is a holy book. It's a God-inspired book. And I really feel like whenever someone attacks that this is fulfilled prophecy and tries to say, oh no, it's not Antiochus and all this, you're doing a lot more damage than what you think, because you're really attacking a good text that could be used to prove that the Bible is a prophetic word of God. And now you're trying to twist it just for your own little eschatological purposes, and your own selfish pride, and trying to be a prophecy teacher when you're really not. And it's like, why not just let God's word be God's word? And so
yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, and I'll read a little bit of what St. Jerome had to say. Like, I'll go into chapter 8, because it's so small on my screen, so I'm real sorry to people. But anyway, he's talking about verse 8, and he had a large horn, refers to the first king, Alexander himself. When he died in Babylon of the age of 32, his 4 generals rose up in his place and divided his empire amongst themselves. For Ptolemy and the son of Lagos seized Egypt, and Philip, who was also called Aridaeus or Arius, and the half brother of Alexander, took over Macedonia. Seleucus Nicanor took over Syria, Babylonia, and all the kingdoms of the east, and Antagonist, and I think that's his name, Antagonist, ruled over Asia Minor. And then it has in quotes, but they shall not rise up with his power, chapter 8:22, since no one was able to equal the greatness of Alexander himself. And a long time afterward, there shall rise a king of Syria, shall be of shameless countenance, and shall understand evil counsels, even Antiochus Epiphanes, the son of Seleucus, who was also called Philopater. And verse 9, after he had been a hostage to Rome, he had, without the knowledge of the Senate, obtained rule by treachery. Antiochus fought with Ptolemy Philometor, that is, against the south, and against Egypt, and then again against the east, and against those who were fomenting revolution in Persia. At last he fought against the Jews and captured Judea, entering into Jerusalem, setting up in the temple of God the statue of Jupiter Olympius, and against the power of heaven, that is, against the children of Israel who were protected by the assistance of angels. He pushed his arrogance to such an extreme that he subjected the majority of the saints to the worship of idols, as if he would tread the very stars beneath his feet. And thus it came to pass that he held the south and the east, that is, Egypt and Persia, under his sway. So, I mean, you can clearly see that even in the early first few centuries, we have confirmation that people were teaching that this was Antiochus that was believing this. So we got the Protestants who were saying it's Antiochus, and they're the same ones who also taught Daniel 9 was fulfilled by Jesus. And I will jump down to that because I'm pretty sure St.Jerome believed the same thing. Oh boy, I'm trying to find it in the text. There's a lot of text for Daniel 9:27. But he definitely thought it was talking about Jesus. I'm trying to find the exact verse because I thought he had it paired off, but obviously he doesn't. I don't want to waste people's time with like a lot of dead silence, so I probably skipped that. But I was going to show that I believe that he says that Jesus fulfilled the 70th week. Well, I'll start here. It says, and why do I speak of the slaying of Christ and of the nation's utter forfeiture of God's help, since the Roman people were going to demolish the city and sanctuary under Vespasian, the leader who was to come? Upon the death, 7 weeks or 49 years, oh man, it's hard for me to kind of keep up, were complete. And after the city of Aliyah was established upon the ruins of Jerusalem, Aelius Hadrian vanquished the revolting Jews in their conflict with the general Timmus Rufus. It was at that time that the sacrifice and the offering ceased, will continue to cease even until the completion of the age, and the desolation is going to endure until the very end. We are not to say that the Jews greatly impressed with the fact that the 7 weeks are mentioned first and after 62, and again a single week divided into 2 parts, for it's simply idiomatic usage of Hebrew language as well as antique Latin, that in quoting a figure, the small number is given first and then the larger. For example, we do not, according to good usage, say in our language, Abraham lived 175 years. On the contrary, the Hebrews' usage of the Hebrew language, as well as the antique Latin, and coin that figure. Oops, sorry. It's hard for me to follow because the lines, because it's so long and small. So it says Abraham lived 175 years. On the contrary, the Hebrews say Abraham lived 5 and 75 and 100 years. So what he's saying is that when they're given like these like weeks in Daniel, they don't say Daniel lived 175 years. On the contrary, the Hebrews say Abraham lived 5, 70, and 100 years. So the fulfillment is not to follow the literal order of the words, but it shall be accomplished in terms of the whole sum taken together. I also well aware that some of the Jews assert that for the statement about the single week, he shall establish a covenant with many for 1 week. The division is between the reigns of Vespasian and Hadrian. According to the history of Josephus, Vespasian and Titus concluded peace with the Jews for 3 years and 6 months, and the other 3 years and 6 months are accounted for Hadrian's reign, when Jerusalem was completely destroyed and the Jewish nation was massacred in large groups at the time, with the result that they even expelled from the borders of Judea. This is what the Hebrews have to say on the subject, paying little attention to the fact that from the first year of Darius, the king of Persia, until the final overthrow of Jerusalem, which befell them under Hadrian, the period involved is 174 Olympiads, or 696 years, which totaling up to 60, or which totaling up to 99 Hebrew weeks plus 3 years, that being the time when Barabbas and the leader of the Jews was crushed in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was demolished to the very ground. So, I'm sorry, I can't really find the exact part where it says whether Jesus fulfilled this or not. So I thought it said something in here, but it's not broken down like the other chapters are, where you can just look at each chapter and see what he had to say. He kind of has a commentary. It's all the way up to verses 24 through 27. So I guess I'd have to read all this, which I don't want to read. I put it in my show notes, though. So if someone wants to see what he had to say, but I do know like a lot of them pretty much thought that this was fulfilled in Jesus's time. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. So are you still there, Solo? Do you got anything you want to add, or?
Oh yeah, I was interacting with my boy a little bit, but yeah, I was listening. I do believe he believes Christ fulfilled it, but I can't recall where in his commentary. It's been a while since I've read it. I didn't read all of it.
Okay, so yeah, I was hoping I could kind of do that just so people could see that they thought that was fulfilled, but yeah, I'd have to search through that commentary. Like I said, I put the links to all this. I also put the links to this one about Porphyrius' comments on Daniel. So, yeah, go ahead.
I do think most, if not all, of the early fathers that commented on Daniel chapter 8 do understand that the time that's given there, the 2300, is linked with the activity of the little horn. Like, for example, Clement of Alexandria, although he puts it with Rome in the 1st century, he still connects it with the activity of the little horn. So I think that's important to note too, because the SDAs, I think, are the only ones that I'm aware of that disconnect the time and the activity of the little horn in Daniel chapter 8.
Okay, so you're saying even though he connects it to Rome,
Yes.
the little horn, he doesn't. Oh man, what was that second point? I'm sorry.
So he would see it the activity of the little horn happening with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD and all that in Daniel chapter 8. And I see why some people want to connect it to that event, because there are similarities, and there's same words that are used in Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 and stuff like that. But it just, given the whole text, the whole chapter, it's just, I think it's better to understand that Daniel 8 is, I guess you could say, a shadow or a type of what was to happen in Daniel 9 and 11:36 onward with Rome in the first century.
Well, see, that's another thing too. It's like the text of Daniel 11 flows better. Because, I mean, if you start trying to say it's Rome and you're trying to say like this doesn't apply to some of these verses doesn't apply to Antiochus and the four kingdoms that rise up after Alexander the Great. Because it's like, then you would just have to start being like, okay, so what's going on after verse 4, right? Because we got verse 3 in Daniel 11, but a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion. So we know this is talking about Alexander the Great. Every single person would admit to this, even the people who hold the Roman view of the Rome being the little horn of Daniel 8. Everyone would still agree this is Alexander.
Yeah.
And then so we get down to verse 4. When he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven, and not to his prosperity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even to be for others besides those. And
notice real
go
quick what you said right there. The kingdom shall be broken, and it's divided toward the four winds. So that it's proving your point earlier about the winds and the horns and all that in chapter 8.
Yeah. The winds is just a descriptive of what's happening with the four kingdoms. It's not. I mean, there's no. And in this text, do we see that it's saying anything about this little horn coming out of the four winds in this text right here?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, I'll read it one more time. And, I mean, think about the SDAs. They say this Rome comes out of the four winds. Now, when I'm reading this, does this sound like it? So, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven, and not to his prosperity, not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even to be for others besides those. So it's like I don't see anything about so far about Rome coming, or how you could have the little horn coming out of these four winds.
Right.
And the king of the south shall be mighty, and one of his princes shall prevail against them, and shall bear rule. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And in the end of the years, they shall be joined together. For the king's daughters of the south shall come up to the king of the north and make agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he continue, nor his arm. But she shall be delivered to death, and that brought her, and they that brought her, he shall begat her, and he that comfort her in these times. That's like, to me, this is real hard when you try to start aiming it at, because I mean, it just seems like if you're going to say that that's Rome, the little horn, and Daniel 8's Rome, you're going to have to start connecting all this other stuff to what's going on with Rome, and I just don't even know how any of this applies to Rome.
My mic was off. Sorry. I think where the SDA start with Rome is, I want to say chapter 20, or I mean, excuse me, verse 20, maybe verse 20. Yeah, 18, 17, somewhere around here is where they start with Rome.
Maybe 17, and he shall set his face to enter with the power of his whole kingdom and his confederates with him.
Something somewhere around there. I always forget where exactly, but I do know that verse 22, they say refers to,
Or maybe even 16, but he shall come, shall do unto him as he lists, and none shall stand against him, and he shall stand in the pleasant land.
Yeah, it
Which
might be. Yeah.
I mean, it might even go on earlier, but the whole thing is, I just wonder what you do with all these other verses that are leading up to it, because that to me doesn't make sense to why this would even be included, why these details would even be included if you're not talking about the if you're not talking about the four kingdoms that arise and everything that's happening up to Antiochus Epiphanes.
Yep. Well, remember when John was on, I think he quoted verse 14 and saying, this can't be referring to Antiochus because look, it says he fails here in verse 14. And so they may even have Rome up here sooner than 16. I'll have to look into that. I forget.
Now we got Nicholas Arthur watching of what's that? What's his show called? I can't even think of the name.
I'm not familiar. I'm not sure.
Well, Nicholas Arthur, he runs this Bible prophecy channel where he does discussions. I can't remember what all of his views are. I used to watch it. It's my memory's so horrible. I used to watch a little bit of his shows. But he was talking about he says, like the man of sin or the man of God may refer to an individual or a line of men. Oh, I see what he's saying. Because like the Protestants say the man of sin may refer to a line of men.
Right.
Or like the Antichrist could refer to a line of men, like a singular office and not just one man.
Right.
I think that's what he might be arguing, that that king in verse 820, I think it's 822, when it's got the singular king.
Yeah.
I think that might be his argument if I'm following him.
Interesting.
But I'm not 100% sure. He might be listening on slight delay. I wonder if that's kind of what it is, and he's commenting from something we said earlier.
Yeah, sometimes I do that as well, and then I'll comment and I'll realize everybody's way ahead of me, and I'm like, they're not going to follow what I'm saying.
Yeah, and it kind of confuses the host. The host
Yeah.
is like, well, what point are you making? It's like, I'm already making this point.
Yeah.
But it's fine. I do the same thing to other people, so that's just what I'm guessing. I'm not saying that's what he's doing. I'm just kind of guessing around.
Right.
Um,
But yeah, I do know in verse 22 of chapter 11, the SDA say that this is the crucifixion of Christ, also mentioned in Daniel chapter 9.
so I was gonna post since Nicholas stopped by. Most people, if you stop by, it's like I'll post up your show so people can know your shows exist. So even if you disagree with me, people can go to your channel, listen to your points. I think it's let's see if I can find Nicholas's channel real quick. Maybe it's Cross the Border. Oh man, maybe I gotta put Nicholas author. But look, here we go. Nick, I'll do you this favor, man. Put this right here. Post out your channel. So anyone wants to go check out his stuff, they can. I know he's got a I think he says he holds to a historicist viewpoint. I probably disagree with him on some things. But in case anyone wants to check him out, I do appreciate Nick stopping by. But anyway, go ahead, Solo. I didn't mean to interrupt. Or did you have anything? I'll just go on to the next subject.
Yeah, I don't remember. No, you're good. Go ahead.
Or Nick, I mean, you're free to click the link and come on if you want to. If there's something you want to chime in. I don't think I'm going to be going for too much longer. I don't want to go too much over 2 hours. But if Nick wanted to come on, say something, he's free to. But I know,
Yeah,
I know Nick's kind of busy.
I'll probably have to get off here soon anyways. So I was hoping that somebody who disagreed would, like a futurist or SDA, would join and discuss the issues, you know?
Well, that would be awesome. Maybe I need to schedule a show ahead of time, like a week ahead of time, and be like, "Hey, you guys want to discuss futurism versus historicism, or SDA versus historicism?" I know SDAs like to call themselves historicists, but strongly disagree. Strongly disagree.
Yeah, it seems like they use historicism as it seems to me, but they use historicism to justify their interpretation of 1844 as opposed to being a historicist. If you're a historicist, you're not going to be holding to 1844. There's no historical event that you can go to prove 1844. It's all in this heavenly sanctuary where Christ moves from one compartment to another in heaven, and apparently is dealing with our sins.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he is on delayed because he's mentioning evenings and mornings. So. But look,
Genesis 1, yeah.
I did post your channel up so everyone can see it, Nick, if people want to go to it. But yeah, I mean, I think that would be great just to talk to people sometime in the future that have like a disagreement. But the one thing is, if I have futurists on, I really want to know your timelines.
Right.
I want to know how you divide the 70 weeks up, where you start them, or if you just divide it up into 3 portions, like you got 7 weeks here, 62 weeks here, 1 week in the future, 2,000 years later. How do you divide these up? You know, like, and what's your justification of starting and stopping? Because to me, the prophecy says 70 weeks are determined. That word weeks is Shavuot. So it does not have to mean like a literal it does not mean like a literal week, because one excuse some people like to say is, oh, we can do days for years because it's done here. Well, that word in Hebrew is Shavuot or Shaboa or Shabua. It can be transliterated a couple of different ways. But that word, when you read other rabbinic literature, whenever it's referring to jubilees, it means a period of 7 years. And so we know 490 years is 10 jubilees. We know these are jubilee periods they're talking about. So to say 7, what the actual word says is 70 Shavua or 70 sevens. And so that sevens, it doesn't have to mean like 7 days. It can mean 7 years, especially when it's in the context of a jubilee period of time. And so therefore you don't have to do years for days. You just say, oh, it's 70 years, because it's talking about jubilees, sabbaticals. There's it's like a Sabbath of years, it's or something like that. It's so you don't have to do year for days, and that's what the Seventh-day Adventists like to try to do, is try to say, oh, well, we can make this 2,300 years because we can take we know there's an evening, morning, and a day, so we'll convert that to a day, then we'll convert that to a year, and that gives us an excuse to convert that to 8,475 evenings, mornings. And I don't think it does, because you're already you're allowed to convert it one time maybe to something else. Like you want to say, oh, I'm converting this to sacrifices. No problem. There's evening and morning sacrifices. I'm going to convert this to days. Okay, no problem. There's evening and morning in a day. But to go, oh, I'm going to convert this from evening, mornings to days, then the years, you're making 2 conversions.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I just don't like. I mean, where in the scripture do you ever have to do 2 conversions? I'd like to see that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean, where else do you do 2 conversions in scripture? So I guess Nicholas Author is arguing that the singular king is all you have to make Antiochus is not enough. No, there's a lot more than that.
I don't think this stream was fixed only on proving it was Antiochus, but there's more than just that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, where there's way more. I mean, when you look at this verse, it clearly says it's coming up. The little goat comes out of one of them. I mean, the little horn comes out of one of them. I mean, when you look at verse 8, and the young he goat hath exerted himself very much, and when it is strong, broken hath been the great horn. We know that's Alexander the Great. And come up doth a vision of four in its place at the four winds of heaven. And from one of them, so I'm using Young's literal translation, and from one of them, well, one of them refers to one of these four. It tells us at the bottom here, who are these four? You read, it's pretty clear. And that being broken, stand up, do four in its place, four kingdoms. This also matches the Hebrew grammar rules, because them is masculine plural. When it says out of one of them, that Hebrew word for them is masculine plural. It matches up to kingdoms, which is also masculine plural. I can actually even bring that up if you really want to see this, because we'll go down to verse 8. So we know winds. What's winds? I'll just look at this here. We got part of speech, noun feminine, transliteration ruach, right? Breath, wind, spirit. So that's what it means is wind. And we see that that's a feminine noun. So let's go look at this. So we also have, so winds is a feminine. So now it says out of one of them down here, verse 9. Oh, let me kind of get myself out of the screen so everyone can see this better. So it says out of one of them. So let's go look at what them is. Okay, in Hebrew, it says this is a pronoun plural masculine, or it can be pronoun plural feminine. But in this particular way, it's translated in the Hebrew. I'm not going to get into all the details. Even the Seventh-day Adventists agree that this is masculine plural in this instance. So if it's masculine plural in this instance, it cannot be winds, because they said it's got to agree with gender. So what the Seventh-day Adventists like to do is they like to go over here to this word heaven, and they go, oh, look, noun masculine. And so the winds are coming out of them, and that means it must be matching up to here. But if it's coming out of one of these four, so it says, and came up four notable ones, or it's actually came up, and there's a vision of four in its place. The notable ones can also just mean vision of four in its place. But this word four, right, the four right here, we know down here it's four kingdoms, right? It doesn't even have horns in the text. It just says four come up in its place. And so we go down in verse 22, and so what are these four in its place? It's four kingdoms. Okay, so what's the word for kingdoms? So I'm going to go down to verse 22. Let's see if kingdoms is masculine plural. Oops, I meant to go to 22. So we got right here, and verse 22, we have the word kingdoms right here. Everyone can see it. Let me click it. Oh, I thought that was masculine. I'm pretty sure kingdoms is masculine the way it is. I could have swore kingdoms is masculine, because king is a masculine word. Because, yeah, king is a masculine word, so why wouldn't Malik? Well, I'll have to figure that one out later. Oh, boy. Man, I don't... I don't know. I'll have to figure that one out later. Now the Adventists are gonna have a field day with that one.
So what is his
I'm
position
pretty
on?
sure though, man. When I was reading this, like maybe not this version, but I'm pretty sure kingdoms is masculine. I could have swore kingdoms is masculine. Because king is masculine. That's why I thought that was. I might have just assumed it because I assumed kingdom as a masculine word. Now I'm like second guessing myself. I don't know. Anyway, I think it's a weak argument. Like I thought it was weak either way. Like that's why I never even stressed on it because I think there's multiple ways of interpreting the masculinity and everything like that of those words and the feminine. And I don't like stressing that. That's why I don't spend a lot of time on it. Because anyway, I think people can abuse this. No one I know is. I could show you words like Arev, Arev in Hebrew, and I could show you Erev, Erev, and I guarantee you, if I show anyone those words, unless you know Hebrew, almost everyone's going to think those are the exact same words, because they're not going to recognize the little dots around it and go, oh, yeah, this dot over here, that's what separates the difference. So
this Nicholas guy, what does he hold to with Daniel 8?
I guess he holds that Rome as the Antichrist, because I bet he I bet he holds to E.B. Eliot's views.
Okay.
And I disagree with E.B. Eliot. He was like a historicist, or claimed to be a historicist writer I think in the late 1800s. And E.B. Eliot, oh gosh, I know he pretty much was talking about how Rome's the Antichrist, and I don't think E.B. Eliot. I think he believed Daniel's 70 week was fulfilled already, but he just held to the view that Rome is that. But when you look at the text, it just doesn't it doesn't even make sense, because this whole the whole thing about the kingdoms is it says in the latter end of their kingdom. So latter end of these four kingdoms that come up in the place of that one kingdom. We know these kingdoms end in 146 BC. So this king has to arise then. It cannot be referring to, and you can't say, well, that must have been Rome, because Rome already stood up before then. I mean, what would they say that Rome is standing up to start to conquer them at the end of their kingdom? I guess that's what they would try to say.
Yeah.
But Rome was already powerful, and they weren't. But see, they weren't really going against the Jews at that time.
Well, the pattern that I'm seeing in chapter 7 and 8 is that kingdoms are represented as beasts. And so what he'd have to prove is that the little horn of Daniel 8 is the fourth beast of Daniel 7, which is the terrifying and dreadful beast. Whereas what I'm seeing in Daniel 8 is that this little horn is still a part of the goat beast in chapter 8, or the leopard in chapter 7.
And it looks like, and I mean, verse 9 clearly says, and out of one of them, meaning one of these four kingdoms, does the little horn rise up. So it doesn't say it comes out of the winds. It would have to come out of Rome to be Rome. And there's just nothing in the text. Like, even when you read down, where's it saying that it's coming? What direction does it say it's coming out? I mean, does it say it's coming out of one of the winds, or out of one of the four directions, like it says in verse 8? Or what they try to imply in verse 8, there's nothing about the word winds or directions down here.
No.
right? I mean, I'm trying to read it one more time to make sure I didn't miss anything, but just as in the latter end of their kingdom, about perfecting the transgressors, stand up a king of fierce face and understanding hidden things. Fierce of face. So I get, were all the popes and the kings of Rome fierce of face, understanding hidden things? I mean, maybe you would say that. I don't know. And his power hath been mighty, but not by his own power. So I guess they're saying like the power of Satan, if you believe it's Rome. And wonderful things does he destroyeth, and he hath prospered and wrought and destroyed the mighty ones and the people of the holy ones. And by his understanding he hath also caused deceit to prosper in his hand, and in his heart exerted himself. And he by ease he destroyeth many. Against the prince of princes he standeth, without hand is broken. And the appearance of the evening and morning. See, but right here doesn't say anything about this king coming out of any other place. We just see the 4 kingdoms, and then it says at the latter end of their kingdom, stand up a king of fierce face and understanding hidden things. And so we know this king in verse 23 is that little horn. And that's what even the people who hold the Roman view of the little horn, they would say, yes, that king is the same king up here in verse 9. But right here it says in verse 9, and out of one of them come forth hath a little horn. So them and the you know what? The one thing I think I did was the same book that I got this them out of, where it said that that's masculine. It was telling me the kingdoms were masculine too. So I'm probably wrong earlier when I said that this was masculine, plural. It might be that the them in here is also feminine, plural. It could be either or. Because I mean, if something was like, if I said these women had a vase and one of them dropped the vase, you would have to point them to a feminine also, right? I don't know how that Hebrew works, but I'm guessing that same thing I was reading was wrong for both for right now until I figure out something more.
Well, I mean, the interpretation of the symbols is given, right? I don't see why people want to go beyond that. I mean, if the interpretation is there, don't interpret yourself. Just go with what the interpretation is, or what's given.
What is it, Nicholas? We're actually dude. I'm putting your comments up on the screen. He's saying like apparently they're not looking at the chat.
Have been this whole time, yeah.
Yeah, we're actually going over it. I mean, if you want to come up here and explain how you get the Rome's the little horn, you're more than welcome to, man. Look, I even promoted your channel, so if you don't even get to finish your points, look at that. Look at that. Everyone can just go look at your channel, right?
Just look at that.
I'm being I am one of the most fair channel runners there is, because I mean, even if you disagree with me and you don't have time to get your point across, I still promote your channel, even if I hate your view. Who else does that? Most people they cry.
Yeah, exactly.
Or ban you.
Or,
I'm just telling you disagreed with me. I'll just ban you. I can't have my flock go astray. I'm like, I always tell those people, dude, make better points so your flock doesn't go astray. Don't have some little guy like me be a threat. You better explain things better. Because if I'm not explaining things better, maybe I don't even have it right. So if Nick can pull you away, and you think that he sounds so much better, by all means, go study what he has to say. I'm just basically bringing this up to people because I've been told it feels like I learned everything wrong before I learned it right. Like I studied every bad position before I found out what was actually right. because you know, when I was growing up, futurism was the biggest thing, because you only had you didn't even have cable. You just had regular TV. You had about 4 to maybe 8 channels you could pick from. And you go to UHF, and you might have your grandmother watching 700 Club while she babysits you. And so that's where you're getting most of your Bible knowledge from. And they're on 700 Club. They're like, did we find that heifer yet? That red heifer? Looks like the Jews are building a third temple now. And all this other stuff, or they're signing. Looks like this peace treaty starting. And you start hearing that stuff for over 30 years, and you start like, huh, another red heifer, and you know, and more talk of another treaty and all this other stuff, and you start to wonder, you know, it's like, is this stuff even true? Do these people even have it right?
Well, I told him to join. I'd be willing to stay on longer and listen to his position, but he's claiming he already stated his position, so it seems like he's not interested in joining.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, I mean, I want to make sure I get a Bible study in with my kids before nighttime, but I go on another half hour, let you explain it if you really want. But okay, so you stated your position above. Well, like I said, it doesn't seem like it adds up to the text. You know, out of one of them come forth hath the little horn, and I mean, winds of heaven right up here. You know, it says they're going at the 4 winds of heaven. And then you go down here to verse Daniel 12. No, not Daniel 12, Daniel 11, verses 3 and 4. It's talking about this mighty king that shall stand up, and we'll all agree that's Alexander. And then when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. So it just says it's being divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. There's nothing about, oh, and something's going to come out of one of the 4 winds of heavens. No, it says, and shall be divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. So this 4 winds of heaven, this is nothing but a description of the 4 kingdoms that are divided. And so we know that in Daniel 8, so I'll go back to Daniel 8, it says that there's 4 that's going to come up in this place, and it clearly tells us, verse 22, the 4 that stand up in its place are 4 kingdoms. From that nation do stand up and not in its power. So why is it going to suddenly skip all the way to Rome? Because we'll all agree that 4 nations did stand up, but now we're just, okay, let's just skip like way later, you know, and just start talking about Rome. Like
Right.
That's what I kind of don't understand. But I mean, if you look at just the history, okay, 4 stand up in its place. We also know that word in Daniel 9 or Daniel 8. In Daniel 8, it says, come up doth a vision. And that word vision right there is the Hebrew word for, it kind of means like a prophetic vision. So it's not just, or, you know, it's like, you know, some translations say 4 notable horns, but that's not, I mean, Young's translate as a vision of 4 in its place. So almost to me, the Hebrew, when it says kazuth, that sounds like, oh, you mean there's like a vision of 4, and then it's telling us this vision of 4 is significant because these 4 out of these 4 kingdoms is going to come this one little horn that's going to persecute the Jews. And we know right at that time, at the later end, there was a transgression of the Jews Hellenizing. So why not just think, okay, latter end of these kingdoms, there actually were these Hellenizing Jews, and there actually was this king that stood up and persecuted them and was fierce. And we got the whole thing in the book of Maccabees. And he did this, I mean, he fulfilled all this, and his power hath been mighty, and not by his own power, and wonderful things he destroyeth. and he hath prospered and wrought and destroyed the mighty ones and the holy ones, which he did do. Like he forced them not to be, if you got circumcised or you circumcised your baby, they would kill your baby and hang that baby around your neck and kill you. What they would do to these people, and some of them, I mean, they did just horrific tortures to them, and by his understanding, he hath also caused deceit to prosper in his hand, and in his heart he exerted himself, and by ease he destroyeth many. Against the prince of princes he standeth, without hand he is broken. And, okay, hey, this is a good one too. Without hand he is broken. How did Antiochus Epiphanes die? I mean, let's just kind of like, I'll just type this randomly on the web. Antiochus Epiphanes, for how did he die? Let's see here. Right here in this little Encyclopedia Britannica, it says he died by, or even like if I just pull up Wikipedia, it says apparently he attacked a temple of Mesopotamia. Now this is just what one secular source in his day described. So it says apparently he attacked a temple of the Mesopotamian deity Nanea in Persia shortly before his demise, and his death was possibly attributed to impiety and punishment by Nanea in some quarters. So it was like that, or the Temple of Diana, or something like that. I think was another thing they caused his death. But he also attacked the Jewish temple, and it was like he died from. Oh, maybe Reddit's got it. Just look at. I'm just pulling up random things. I did have a really good article, but I mean, in the Book of Maccabees, they say he fell gravely sick on his way as a punishment from God and died. This is in Second Maccabees 1 through 10 through 17 gives a completely different story. Here it says that Antiochus died when he went to the temple of Nanea in Persia. He had an intention to marry the idol and inherit the temple's riches that way, but the priests of the temple trapped him in it and killed him. But I don't recall anybody. Most sources say he did not die from that. He died from like a curse.
Well, I think he might be leaving. He said he's out, or he said out. So if he's leaving, I'll make this point real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. You make whatever point you want while I'm looking this up. I was just trying to speak while I was looking for things.
He said a horn first is.
Do you want to bring up your screen or anything? Do I need to do that?
Sure.
Here, I'll bring up your screen while you're looking, just in case you want to pull up a point while you're doing all this. So there, we got your screen going while
He said, so in that comment, he said, a horn is first a division of a beast. So little horn would be a further division out of one of the horns. Not necessarily. Because the first horn on the goat is not a division, it's just the first king. So that doesn't always follow. Sometimes it is. That's the issue I see with a lot of these people. They create these patterns and say the pattern has to follow completely through. Well, no, let's see what the text says. If it doesn't follow through, it doesn't follow through. These four horns are, in fact, a division, but they're a division of the goat. So they're still the goat. But then when we see this little horn, or this king of boldface, this little horn is not a further division. It's just from one of these four. So it's not a division further of one of those four. And in fact, his father Antiochus III was actually bringing the Seleucid Empire back to its full strength and actually going beyond that. And Antiochus IV followed through and did the same thing. So it's actually not a division, but it's a strengthening of that Seleucid Empire. And actually, he would be the last king of the Seleucid Empire to do that very thing. So just with these horns on the goat that we see, that it's not always a division.
Still
But
looking at that. Oh, go ahead, man. You can keep going.
no, that was pretty much it. I just want to make that point because it seems like he's doing what the SDAs do and say, well, here's this pattern, and this pattern has to follow through all the way. And that was what my guest was saying the other night when he talked with me. He's like, here are these patterns, so therefore we have to follow these patterns even when the text does not follow that pattern. And it's like, well, why? Do you have this external system you want to prove, and that's why? Or is there another reason maybe why? But I don't see a need to follow a set pattern unless the text does. So, but that was it.
Okay. Man, I cannot find that. I wish I could find that one article, man, because it goes into like 3 different sources that tell you that Antiochus died without human hands, like died of illness.
Yeah. I forget what illness though.
Yeah, I can't think. I almost want to say it's like some illness that starts with a D, if I'm not mistaken, but I can't remember for sure. But I just know there's like secular sources from or non-Jewish sources from that era that say like he died without hand, but they attribute his death to trying to rob a different temple, but he failed. See, part of the thing was that this one author makes a point about is that he failed when he tried to take this one temple, even though they say that that's what the disease came from, was from trying to take that temple, and that was a curse on him. But that was like a failed attempt. Whereas, when he when he profaned the Jews' temple, that was a successful attempt at attacking a temple. And it kind of makes more sense that maybe the disease he got was from a successful attack against God's temple, but rather than some curse from attacking some pagan temple where he unsuccessfully attacked it. Yeah, I don't really have too many more points to make. So
Yeah, I'm pretty good too.
All right, I'll leave the show at that. I'm gonna probably, if I do another show next week or the week after, I'm gonna probably try to have Scott Clem on and do an interview. I'd like to talk to him a lot about the. I actually want to kind of go into more stuff about him running for office and his time in office and things like that, and kind of like relate that to biblical things. Because one of the interesting things that Scott brought up was that Christians, when they do all this, like they think it's the end time. This happened with the SDAs and Ellen White. They thought Jesus was coming soon. So did they plant crops that year? Were they ready for the harvest?
Exactly. Yeah.
They were getting rid of their possessions, selling things. They were so confident Jesus would come back. They didn't make preparations.
Yep.
And so when Jesus didn't come, that was very devastating to them. And so people today, they kind of do similar things where they don't get involved. They're just like, no, it's the end. Don't bother getting involved in anything or trying to, better society. We're too close to the end. Nothing's going to matter. Jesus is coming soon. And then as they watch things get worse, they're like, see, it's just getting worse. Jesus is coming. And then they die. And then, everyone keeps going, oh, look, it's just getting worse. But yeah, because no one's doing anything. Everyone's just kind of going on. Now, I believe things are going to get to a point, but they're going to, to where, Jesus is going to come back. But I don't think it's for us to help it along. It could be that things get so bad and Jesus doesn't come, and then maybe people start doing things because they're so sick and tired, and maybe that's what they really need, just like a good hard oppression where they watch their children starve to death and things like that. And then once you see that, then you're like, oh, man, you know what? Maybe Jesus isn't going to come back anytime soon. Maybe I need to stop living like this and actually start, getting involved in society and doing something to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Um,
I think when the time comes and when it's close to his return, you'll know it. Until then, you should definitely be involved, no doubt. So I look forward to that interview you have with him on politics. That'd be
Yeah,
awesome.
because I'm not gonna, because I'm trying to make sure my shows are not too politically, where it's just like, well, all we did was discuss politics. I want to make sure it's like edifying for, Christianity, it tries to motivate you into seeing things in a different way to where you can apply, your Christian life, or even trying to enrich your Christian life, like that's kind of what I'm mostly wanting to push people towards, is just trying to enrich their life and not live like, oh man, Jesus is going to end, so I might as well not, worry about what's going to happen to my children because Jesus is going to come soon. So I'm not going to invest my time into doing anything to change society. I
Yeah,
mean,
I
I
hear
guess
you.
that's my big stickler, and I know like with the SDAs, they constantly preach at times almost in, and I noticed that, man, ever since 2020. Like everyone kind of has this attitude, almost like not doing anything. It's like either Trump's going to be the Messiah that changes everything, or else Jesus is just going to come back. But everything else you can possibly do, don't bother doing it.
The Trump train, chugga 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 chugga. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I mean, meanwhile, all you gotta do is just get, local elected officials not to go along with things like your city council. Dude, one of my city council tried to pass a mask mandate. Dude, they're gonna hear from it. They live down the street from me. I'll throw rocks at their house.
Yeah.
You know, tell them to come out here and talk to me. It's like,
Right.
I mean, like if you see, that's the thing. Most people can't even tell you who their city council is, but they're going to tell you, oh, everything's so hopeless. But well, have you ever even, tried to get involved in where you even know who your sheriff is? Like my sheriff, he's not going to, like, if something happened, he's not going to go and get all over my case about, certain things. And that sheriff can override a federal official. The sheriff can tell the FBI, get the heck out of here.
Yep. Yep.
So what if, the government did try to do something? Well, hey, at least I got a sheriff that's like, well, I'm at least going to make that attempt. I mean, that's more than what most would even say.
Yep. Yep.
Right. So I mean, those things are important, and you got to think, like I said earlier, if if you didn't bother to clean your house in a year, you can't expect it just to be clean in one day, and you got to start out small,
Yep.
and get a little bit done at a time. And it's kind of like the same way with this. I mean, people have just neglected it and neglected it and neglected it, and you got to start out small. You might be like, man, what's a city council going to do? Well, it's better than nothing you had
It's
to
gonna do a
get.
lot for you locally.
Yeah, you just at least get one person on city council. At least they got a voice where it's like, okay, this was a representative and he said this or she said this. So if they are speaking this, they're speaking for a group of people that elected them. So they're in government, so their voice has some clout. Like, yes, a city councilman, I feel like I could go talk to my governor if I was a city councilman, because I would be like, hey, but I am a city council member and I want to talk to you. And they're more prone to have to listen to you.
Yeah. Yep. All right, man. I got to take off, so I appreciate you having me on.
All right, man. Hey, it's good to have you on. Appreciate Scott Clem for stopping by, and I hope everyone enjoyed the show, and thank you.